I'm back, baby! You miss me? Well, you should have. I've returned once again to your screen to share some pixel art knowledge. But first, it's time for the news. First story of the week. This is actually pretty awesome. Check this out. Last week, after months of practice, I can finally do a decent Cerberus Snape impression. Watch this.
Mr. Potter, what are you doing in my swamp?
Eh? Pretty good, right? In gaming news, Elden Ring still isn't out. So you're gonna have to wait to run around and get killed by that big mini-armed man. In not gaming related news, I have an ingrown toenail. It really hurts whenever I touch it or touch anything with it. What else? People on Twitter are mad at something, probably. Oh yeah, this is a good news story. I'm stuck in here forever until I make 100 episodes of content about pixel art. If you're wondering what all that noise is, by the way, the studio is currently being rebuilt by Mafia Orc's minions. Who's that? Mafia Orc? Who's that guy? Oh, he's just the guy who set me on fire and killed me twice. Yeah, that guy. Here's a little recap for you. How many friends are there? Anywho, he left me this lovely written note. Let's give it a read.
Dear Dum Dum, I'm on vacation in Lordran, the place where Dark Souls is. I will be sipping Estus by a big bonfire and catching up with some old friends. It is crazy how few ATMs there are here. You cannot get souls out anywhere, and when you do find the machine, the conversion rate is abysmal. See you later. I'm going to go bone one of those sexy gargoyles. I'll be back soon. Do not worry. The show's repairs will be done by some of my minions. Love, Mafia Orc. P.S. If you try to leave, I will turn you inside out and wear you like a jacket.
Pretty sure this letter is printed on some kind of skin. Moving right along, this evening we'll be looking at a classic. It's often called the grandfather of indie games. It was made by one Japanese dude, and it's called Hey, watch it. Cave Story. We're going to analyse the terrain, also known as the tile sets of Cave Story, and make our very own environment based on its style. Oi, can you stop crafting? Yeah, we're live right now, we're like filming. So many interruptions. So we're going to take a look at what makes the levels look so clean and crisp and how they work as effective game assets. Dude, hey, that's my drink. This little thing tried to take my drink. He was just gonna drink it, take it off the table and drink my coffee. Oi, you, why are you digging? Why would you be digging? Shouldn't you be putting up scaffolding or something? You're actively breaking things. Yes, you. Yes. Hey, no, stop. Hey, stop digging. No. No. Shoot, go away. Go away. That's it, I've had enough.
Now that those fucking things are out of the way, let's begin.
If you haven't played it, Cave Story is an indie Metroidvania that released in 2004. You play as an amnesiac robot exploring a system of caves and uncovering your past. Well, actually it's more than a cave, but I don't want to spoil anything. The gameplay involves a lot of precision platforming and shooting with an interesting upgrade system for your gun. You collect little energy Doritos that power up your weapon, but when you get hit, that weapon gets de-leveled, probably because you lost all your Doritos. That's all I'll say about the game in terms of plot. The creator, Daisuke Amaya, also known as Pixel, made the game on his own. He made his own engine and his own program to make the music. That's a lot of stuff to do for one person. This was also a time before being an indie developer was a common or an established way of making a living. It was an era of freeware games like N and Alien Hominid. As a little aside, Cave Story, N and Alien Hominid all eventually came out for other platforms, which allowed the creators to make money off their respective games. In this video, I'm only talking about Cave Story Classic, not all the ports for PSP, Xbox, Dreamcast, Sega Genesis, iPod Nano, DSLR camera, just the non-up-resed vanilla version. And especially not the 3D version. No hate, but just, likey. I have a question for you. A piece of art, what is it for? Well, art can be anything, right? It can be made for its own sake, or it can be made for no reason at all. It could be made to inspire or disgust, or to be counterculture, or whatever this art's trying to do. Is he pro Elon Musk or anti? I don't know. So if anything can be art, what about design? Well, a design is generally meant to accomplish something. That's an important factor when making art for a game. You're making designs with a specific purpose. Maybe you want to make it clear what is friend or what is foe, what you can stand on and what you can't stand on, or how dangerous a foe is. Are they a level 1 thug or level 100 Giga Chad boss? Here's an example. In Team Fortress, one of the goals of the character designs is to make the class and role of the character immediately obvious. This big bulky guy is obviously someone with lots of health. He's going to cause heaps of damage and probably moves very slowly. How do we know that? Well, he's way bigger than all the other characters. He has a gigantic weapon and his legs are tiny. The design of this big fella is to sell who he is and what he does very quickly. His design is big and hefty, and then we can make assumptions based off that. You may be asking some questions. Alex, what does this have to do with Cave Story? Can you hurry up, or can you not take the scenic route in this video and get to the fucking point? Okay, here's the main thing. You should think about what a design is trying to achieve, not just mindlessly copy a design. We're going to be looking at Cave Story's environments, so let's think about what the environments are made for. What are they designed to do, right? Cool beans. For this episode, I want to break everything up into 4 design elements: constraints, consistency, readability, and world building. Let's start with constraints. Pixel had a limited time when making the game. If you consider he gave attention to an entire game's programming, music, game design, playtesting, sound effects, particle effects, and narrative, he didn't have all the time in the world to make a complicated looking art style with a million assets. He needed to keep the visuals relatively simple. I don't mean it in a derogatory way either. Simple meant he made his assets reusable enough so he could get the whole thing done. It was smart to choose low resolution pixel art as a medium. By doing that, he limited how much detail there was in everything and therefore saving time. Smaller pixels equals less decisions. Could you imagine if he chucked a whole bloody Sistine Chapel in there, drawing every single brick and stained glass window? He'd be still working on the game today. And if you're still working on the game today, then I wouldn't be making this video. And he obviously didn't, because I am making this video. That makes sense, right?
What?
The style he chose wasn't also great for his time constraints, but also to make it look cohesive. And that brings me to consistency. Something I like about the rendering style of Cave Story is that many of the game's assets have the light coming from the top left. It unifies everything together. Look at this section. We've got a distinct top lighting and then shadow on the other side. The assets follow these rules and then it meshes all together very well. Another thing that brings consistency is the limited color palette. If you remember from the first episode, a palette is a limited set of colors a game will use. There's often a color palette for the whole game and then a section of that palette makes up the terrain or the characters. In Cave Story, each area uses a very small range of colors. Look at this place. All the foreground elements use this yellow to brown range. That's only a few colors, and the background only uses a couple of blues. You can expect that in any given area, there's only a certain number of colors allocated to what you interact with and a certain number of colors allocated to what's in the background. Cave Story's environments are made of something called tile sets. They are a series of square graphics called tiles that make up the terrain and environment of some video games. They're all laid out in a grid. You can actually see the same tile repeated multiple times. This comes out of memory constraints of old hardware, but now has become an aesthetic. To illustrate, check this out. This entire scene is made up of only these parts. Don't believe me? Look at this animation. See? From those few little bits we can make an entire level. On to the third, and in my opinion the most important design element, readability. You could also call this how clear something is. Remember the Team Fortress example? The silhouette with the big guy shows you immediately what he does. I'm going to talk about factors that increase a similar kind of readability, but rather than telling if it's a big macho man, it's going to answer questions like, can I jump on it? Will it hurt me? Or will I fall through it? One way this is achieved is with a contrast of value. Value being how dark or light something is. You could think of it how much white or black is mixed in with the color. Let's look at this level in monochrome. See how it's pretty obvious which area something you can jump on and what isn't? Keeping most of the tones dark in untraversable terrain and light where it's traversable makes the player confident they won't smack into a wall when they're running and jumping around. On top of that, the colors used in the foreground elements are contrasting the background. You've probably heard of this before, but they're called complementary colors. When a complementary colour is put beside another, they contrast. Orange and blue, yellow and purple, green and red. And that's happening here. Warmer yellows and browns next to cooler blues. A lot of the early areas have background walls that are cool in colour. Having that opposing a bright, warmer set of terrains helps separate the traversable foreground from the background elements. Even when there is a terrain that's made of the same type of rocks as the ground but are behind the player, it's obvious that you won't collide with them. The colours shift into cooler tones, pushing it into the background. Traversable tiles, tiles behind the player, and background tiles all separated by colour and value. This is by no means a hard and fast rule. You don't need to pick those same colours. There are areas later in the game that have warm backgrounds rather than cool blue, but the background is darker than the foreground, and there's also grey looking tiles in the foreground, so you get that contrast anyway. I'd say keep a general balance of obscuring unimportant stuff into the background by making it darker and more desaturated, and try and have varied colours between that and the foreground. All of this readability is once again to serve gameplay, which at times is quite hectic. There are sections with enemies and effects absolutely everywhere, like this. Look, this is nuts. One final thing I'll say on readability. With hazards, they're very clear in Cave Story, things that you can get hurt by. Stuff like these bloody spikes. It's immediately obvious that you're going to die if you touch them because they have this really harsh red, like there's blood all over them. You know that you'll die if you touch them. The last part of these design elements is world building. Here's a wild observation. Cave Story takes place in a cave. Yeah, thank you. Yep. Alright, shut up. Everyone shut up! So because it takes place in a cave, a lot of its assets are going to be stone and metal. So when thinking about what you're going to make, narrow what you're going to include in the game world to that realm of earthiness. Anyway, in making your own level design, we should keep pretty close to those themes and colours I just mentioned before. So we know we have to incorporate constraints, consistency, readability, and world building into our design. What else is there? Well, there's some technical things, and then some sweet little thing at the end to tie it together. Side note, the main feedback I got from the first video was that it was too long, so here's the solution. It's going to be twice as long, just for you. Okay, technical stuff. Background tiles. Let's look at them. So here we can see a Cave Story background. It's made of a single repeating tile of 128 by 128 pixels. That's all you need, the one thing copied and pasted. When it comes to background tile pieces, you have a balancing act to play. Let's look at this tile. On the one hand, you could draw something like this. It's super detailed, super unique, but look what happens when you tile it multiple times. You see the same obvious elements stick out. Can you see how that bit just kind of attracts the eye, that little rock? It's like you notice it being copied and pasted everywhere. It's too obvious that it's the same art repeated. You could go the other way, and you don't have the same issue, but there really isn't much detail in it. It's kind of boring. So we want to hit the sweet spot. Just enough detail to make the area look rich, but not so much that you're just looking at one repeating rock sticking out like a sore thumb. The game has just the right amount of detail. In a bigger production, there'd be lots of variations in the background pieces, lots of colours, even multiple levels of parallax to the background. Look at games like Chasm. It has like multiple pieces that all slide together beautifully. Shout out to Dan Fessler. But remember, once again, we need to be efficient. If we were one person, we'd have to pick our battles. So let's put all the unique detail into the foreground elements instead. What's interesting about Cave Story is that there's only two layers it uses, the far backdrop and the foreground plus some midground tiles. Nice and simple. One last little thing before we get started. This part of my analysis of games is a bit subjective, but I think it ties everything together. A feature list of a game's design is not its essence. What makes the game feel and look cool is what its setting means, what the story means, how it feels to play, what feels good to do. If you want to make cool levels, a part of that process is thinking of the game as a whole. What is the big picture? If you want to make something that looks absolutely sick, you have to inspect the other parts of the game and take it as a whole. This game shifts in tone as it goes along. The game has an increasing feeling of decay and darkness. Beloved characters die. The visuals reflect that. What I'm talking about is kind of hard to explain. I guess a good example of it is the difference between mindlessly doodling when you're sketching something and being fully present when you're drawing something. When you're fully into it and fully present with all the parts, you'll make something better. Something that seems more integrated. Who knows, if you start practicing an art style by taking the whole thing in, you might come up with a game idea or even get good enough that you can get a job in the industry. I think it's really a good idea to like fully immerse yourself in an art style and try and learn it, rather than just copy it mindlessly. I think I've covered everything that I wanted to explain. Let's get into the designing process. Let's begin. First things first, once again, it's your boy, reference. The first thing I'm looking for is like Australian landscape, because I think it's got some nice colours. It often has that blue-orange mixture, so yeah, like this thing. Like this shows some nice contrasting colours. Another thing is like shrubbery, so here I like those little shrub pieces. I think I might use something like that. I'm starting off with the background. I think it's the most important thing to begin with because it's a single piece that's used the most, I would say. So what I'm doing is I'm following that idea that I said in the start of the video where light comes from the top or the left and then the shadows coming from the other side. So I'm just like filling that in, blocking that in first. You'll notice it sort of looks like the greyish brown rocks in the reference. If you look on the right side, I'm sort of getting a bit of that and then using a similar blue as like the blue background. So kind of mixing references together to try and get a result that feels like it fits the game. It's quite a flat style, so a lot of the shapes that are flat I don't really edit too much, and it's more the sides I've found that like have more of the detail, and you'll see that I'm going in and like, kind of carving shapes into the rock. After I've decided what the geometry is, I'm sort of like going in there and adding more subtle details. So those kind of striations to the slated rock is sort of indicative of the Australian outback. That's what the rocks look like sometimes. So I'm pretty happy with what I have. Now I'm starting to build a tile set. Now in Acebrite, there's a really cool feature, which is in some other pixel art programs as well, where you can build a shape, like a tile, and then repeat it multiple times, and then you can edit all of them. So you'll see, as I paint on one, it's propagating the change across all of them, which is quite handy because in some cases you don't want it to feel like it's a bunch of squares, and if you have to like edit one asset, copy and paste it, it's kind of not conducive to making a nice set of environments. So this is really good because I just keep painting. I'm not even really sure where the edges are as I'm painting. I'm just going crazy, painting whatever looks good, and then towards the end I'll sort of consolidate and figure it out. You'll notice that I've always got reference up. I think it's really good to do that. And now there's these kind of like ornate stones that are etched, which Cave Story has a lot of. They have like these stones that sort of don't really look very organically placed, but I think that's because of the nature of tile sets, is you can't really put a tile like in between two tile spots, so you often get it looking kind of square, but it's kind of a style. It's something you can lean into. And then I'm making a small one, which I kind of cheated. I grabbed the big one, scaled it down, and just edited it a little bit. You're also going to notice that as I go, the terrain, the background are going to flash different colors, and that's me, seeing what colors they are and changing them, because sometimes the start I have an idea, turns out it doesn't look very good or doesn't sit right, and I'll just change it. So yeah, a lot of this stuff is transient. It's like coming in and out. There's areas that I'll work on 4 different times. There's another area I drew it once, that's it. Yeah. Just adding in some shrubs now, which I think adds a little bit of life to the area. Yeah, you'll see there, just like the background tinted it darker. Just thought it would be great to push it back just that little bit further, because I'm also thinking about as if this was a game, so. here I've started making some background pieces. Something that I've noticed a lot in Cave Story is using a front tile and then tinting it darker, and that pushes it back, and it's very efficient because, I mean, look how quickly this went from, you know, a plane that you're standing on top of, or like a plateau, all of a sudden now it's a cave with very little effort. Believe it or not, before this area is done, you'll notice like pretty big changes. I feel like I'm finished, take a step back, I look at it again, it's not quite right, I edit it. It's funny, a lot of my career in pixel art has been trying to make things more and more detailed. And with this style, I've had to fight that urge to try and render things, to try and make things too dense, which is an interesting exercise in itself. Here I'm adding these little stalactites, which if you've played Cave Story, you know that there's some terrain that, like, maybe the average person who hasn't played it might think you'd bump into them, but as a player you learn that if it's not square, usually you can walk through it. So I did that here. I also will change my mind later and you'll see they'll look a bit different. And here I'm making something like the touch fuzzy, get dizzy, like plants from Yoshi's Island. I forgot the name of the actual plant, but those things, you know, like will come off and probably track the player and try and, you know, kill him. And then these are some enemies that I think vaguely fit the style. I didn't want to include like a whole character design aspect because that would just make the video take too long, but I can just go over it quickly now. I made it low color, not very shaded, and the use of a bit of white. That seems to be the general gist of the Cave Story characters, like quotes like white. The enemies usually have like white eyes or have some kind of element like that. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And quite simple. I think the fact that they move makes you sure that you're gonna, you know, that they're an enemy. So their readability is like not optimal, I wouldn't say, but it doesn't matter because the terrain doesn't move. You're not gonna, you know, worry about that. But if you see something flapping or moving, even if it's not fully visible, it's moving. So that's like a point of difference. And yeah, you can see the terrain. I started sloping it to fit more of the style. And I'm actually just totally going over my art. Like, it's pretty much a new asset now because I just didn't feel like it fit. So now I'm kind of going back to that top left lighting, bottom right shadow. Just really trying to sell that more because I think that's key to the art style. Usually towards the end, it's mucking around, it's moving things back and forth. Not exactly the most interesting part of it. I think it's more interesting seeing the start and seeing like the big blocks being turned into stuff, but at this point it's a lot of going in, editing, zooming out. Not really exciting, I wouldn't say. And then yeah, once again, I looked at it and decided it should be a bit more desaturated and have a bit of a gradient, I think, because I feel like with contrast, it's not just foreground, background. Contrast also works with the foreground itself. So you'll notice it's darker down the bottom because that's where I don't want you to look, and it's lighter at the top and more desaturated. That's where I want you to look. So it kind of pushes the eyes up. And you'll also notice that the stalactites in the back, I changed the color just to push them back because I just didn't want it to seem like you could bump into them, because for me, readability is more important than every other aspect of a game, because that's the thing you're reading as you play. A boss could look really cool, but if something doesn't read well, it's going to feel cheap. Like, for example, if he's got a weapon that it doesn't read that he's going to hit you and he swipes and hurts you, it's not going to feel good if it doesn't read well. you know? Yeah, and then once again, I go in and I'm fucking with the colors, because why not, right? Just with pixel art, that's an advantage. You can really do that. You know, when you're done with a piece, zoom out, zoom in, change colors. Like, you don't have to be married to the very first design you do. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being a bit messy. Anyway, there you go. My own cave story mock-up. I think it looks like pretty close. There's some things that I'd probably fix, but I'm gonna call this one done. Seriously, dude, don't touch that. That's my stuff. Leave it alone. Oh, that's not for you. That's my... Yes, I'm talking to you, mate. Just stop touching my stuff. Oi, get away from my desk. You want my desk? Fine, take that. Here you go. You want my jacket? Here's my jacket. Feel free, take anything you want, anything you need. Take everything. Take it all. Do you have any retro style game you want me to look at? Something old or new? Anything but Metal Slug though. A video on that would take me like a year. Let me know your suggestion by faxing it to my parents' house. That's it. Video over. Go back to scrolling Instagram. I don't know. Go outside and play in the sun. Or play in the moonlight and freak people out. It's your life. You can do what you want. Oh. Gotcha! Yes! Free pickaxe. Peace, biatch!